So this is an infinity banknote by the Burning Man artist Dardara, who's actually created his own bank called the Change Exchange, and he has a sculpture out on the playa. So first of all, actually I'm going to go back. So first of all, yeah, I mean, I've thought a lot, almost my whole life, I guess, around the purpose of art, you know, in this process of global transformation or social change that's happening. And I have a very personal context for this, which is my mother was part of the Beat generation in the 1950s. And she was actually a very young woman who was dating Jack Kerouac when On the Road came out. And she saw him, go from somebody who was just totally impoverished, nobody knew, to have this huge fame, which ultimately ended up kind of ruining him. But the Beats obviously, had a tremendous cultural impact. And if you go back to the roots of the Beats in the 1940s, they were just a very small group of artists who began to sort of beam into a new pattern of perception or field of information. And they began to recognize that in the public sphere of their society, consciousness was absent. That if you looked into the political or the academic or the institutional realms or the artistic realms, there was no direct presence, there was no spontaneity. Consciousness had somehow become rigidified or ossified, and they recognized there needed to be a breakthrough into a new level of spontaneous perception. So this really became their mantra as a movement. They talked about you are a genius all the time, or first thought, best thought, or they had the concept of a spontaneous prosody. And they really became kind of inspired by this idea of the search for personal liberation, which they explored through drugs, mysticism, unconventional relationship patterns, and so on. So, and the Beats, like most artists, I would say, were formed very much by early childhood trauma. They'd all had sort of tragic upbringings, Kerouac and Ginsberg, and this had formed this extra sensitivity. So I think one thing that we see with the artist is somebody who, has this, excess of maybe suffering when they're young, and that leads them to develop a gift. It's kind of like the pearl, that develops because the oyster has the grit of sand in it, or as Carl Jung likes to say, the wound is the gift. So artists then have this extra bit of sensitivity or empathy that makes them begin to take notice of a new pattern of perception or field of information that most people aren't aware of. So just to give us some context, I mean, my perspective is that, in our present circumstances, the role of the artist has to shift, the role of the artist and the media maker and the producer. And we need to rethink that role in relationship to the planetary emergency that's underway. And obviously, I think we all know that we're in a period of accelerating climate change, rampant species extinction, bigger and bigger industrial catastrophes like, the BP oil spill in Fukushima, global depletion of resources, and so on. So in a way, the artist, going back to the 50s and before, sort of self-identified as the rebel or the outsider who didn't really have a social role, and in a sense was meant to kind of challenge society's roles. But the question is really, in such a situation as we're now in, does the artist have to step into a different role and a different responsibility? One thing that's really important to consider is that humans are mythological creatures. We really live through myth. We can't really get across the room without a myth or a narrative or a legend that sort of underlies our actions. This is a quote from the great writer Patrick Harpur. "We cannot see the world except through some perspective or imaginative framework. In short, some myth. Indeed, the world we see is the myth we are in." So one idea that I would propose to you is that we're seeing a transition right now from a set of cultural myths or cultural narratives that have supported our civilization over the last several hundred years. And at the same time, those are beginning to show their destructive aspects. A new myth is beginning to develop or unfold. So if we were to look at the old myth that we've kind of been embedded in up to this point, one ways that you could kind of think about it is this idea that it's a materialist scientific worldview where consciousness is simply brain-based. Then we have evolution, Darwinian model of evolution, which was kind of bowdlerized into this idea of the survival of the fittest, that everything is a competition for genes and resources. Capitalism seems to be the best system that we have devised, and it's based on a kind of dog-eat-dog kind of idea. Although in nature, dogs don't eat dogs, they sniff dogs. And then the idea that humans are somehow separate from nature, And also this idea is very much part of our current paradigm that technology is going to be the savior, that even though we've created this crisis, we're going to develop these next levels of technology which are somehow going to save us. So the new myth that we're entering into, and really there are lots of ways to articulate or think about it. These are some of the principles that I think are part of it. The idea of the holographic universe, the realization that consciousness is not just an epiphenomenon of matter, but is somehow immanent to the universe itself. The idea of epigenetics, which is a new discipline of biology, the idea that awareness impacts biology even down to the cellular level. This idea from Barbara Marx Hubbard of conscious evolution, the idea that we could become co-creative with the evolutionary process. And a shift from a competition-based model to one of cooperation, collaboration, and symbiosis. And along with that awareness that everything is actually interconnected and there is no away, right? We no longer think that we can throw our trash away or offload our toxic waste to the third world because we know it just circulates in the biosphere as a whole. So the role of art, from my perspective, is really to create and substantiate, imprint, and distribute this new mythology. So here's a quote from William Blake: "The imagination is not a state, it is the human existence itself." And I think for me that is very profoundly true. I think it takes a while to really anchor the level to which that is the reality that we're in. So then we look at media. I mean, obviously art is a form of media. We use, the artist, expresses themselves through various forms of media. And what is the primary function of media? We tend to think it's to tell a story or to convey information, but if we really to step back and look at it systemically, we might see that the role of media, the primary function, is not really to convey information or tell a story, but to coordinate behavior. So the mass media actually coordinates behavior on a global scale. People are told how to respond to authority, what to consume, how to form relationships. They sort of model their behavior on this imprint that's constantly coming through the mainstream media, on the mass scale. And then people like us who maybe are beginning to assimilate alternative media, we take in different patterns of behavior and thought and action from that. So this idea that art could be utilized as an instrument or a tool to help us redesign society was very much an idea that the German conceptual artist Joseph Beuys had. And he had the concept of a social sculpture. And here's a quote from Beuys: "Only art is capable of dismantling the repressive effects of a senile social system to build a social organism as a work of art." So obviously, if we think about social sculpture, we have a great example right here, which is Burning Man. A social sculpture is, in a sense, an opportunity where we change the game rules of normal society. We experiment, we innovate, we iterate, and we see what develops. So festivals, intentional communities are obvious examples of social sculpture. But then we could even think that a corporation is a kind of social sculpture, or an economic system, a banking system. So the artist Dardera, is creating his own artist designed bank. So one thing that I think is key in this mythological shift from this old paradigm to the new paradigm is developing empathy. Buckminster Fuller really had this idea that we would only survive as a species if we created a world that worked for everybody on it. Now, empathy is a really interesting thing. I mean, a lot of us feel empathy personally or on a small scale, but it's a different thing for us to really extend that to a universal level. And that's actually not something that's intrinsic or instinctive to us. It actually requires an act of the imagination and a mental act, in a sense. So Buckminster Fuller noted, "No human chromosomes say make the world work for everybody. Only mind can tell you that." And I think, even in places like Burning Man, we see places where there are empathy gaps, where people are able to pay a lot of money to build up certain camps and have paid workers, come in and do stuff, who aren't really brought into the inclusivity. That's the model here. So yeah, one model from Barbara Marx Hubbard is this idea of conscious evolution. As part of this new mythological paradigm, the idea would be that humanity is on the cusp of self-realizing itself as a singular organism on a planetary scale in symbiotic relationship with the planetary ecology as a whole. So when we can look at that, there's a great book called Spontaneous Evolution by Bruce Lipton and Steve Behrman, where they really look at our bodies as a model for this next stage of our planetary evolution. You know, because our bodies are these huge colonies of microorganisms that learned how to work together to create symbiosis to build more complex structures. You know, and in our bodies, you know, the organs don't make war on each other. You don't have the liver, you know, hoarding all of the resources and depriving the pancreas of what it needs, you know. So in a sense, if we were to recognize ourselves as a global planetary organism, you know, it would be innate and natural to us to want to share resources and energy equitably. Okay, so essentially, yeah, so I see that the artist has this crucial role to play in envisioning and articulating this new mythology of cooperation, empathy, you know, a kind of more consciousness-based approach to how transformation could happen, and really for us to really think about how we can use our creativity and our technical genius as a species to elevate humanity as a whole while creating a support structure for the biosphere. And these would be some of the strategies for this social change that would be necessary. We'd have to reinvent corporations. We could think of them as social sculptures or as you know, instruments for transformation. And obviously corporations are the most powerful kind of artifacts that humans have created in terms of their ability to transform matter and energy. You know, but at the moment, corporations kind of function destructively. One idea is rather than thinking about them as being permanently like that, we could see them as nascent organs of this collective body of humanity. You know, so an energy company or an oil company is like the blood in our bodies. A media company is like the perceptual mechanisms, you know, and so on. So if we think in those terms, corporations could evolve to be extremely powerful and benevolent. And then, as I noted, using art, media, social technologies to change consciousness and imprint a new behavior pattern that's actually sustainable on a global level. And then we need to reinvent civil society to kind of develop social, political, and economic alternatives, iterate them, and also raise consciousness around these alternatives. And I would see that our goal would be to design a planetary community based in symbiosis and cooperation as a collective work of art. So I'm going to end on a quote from the mystic and paleontologist Teilhard de Chardin. There it is. The day will come when, after harnessing space, the winds, the tides, and gravitation, we shall harness for God the energies of love. And on that day, for the second time in the history of the world, we shall have discovered fire. Thank you.